All around you is a ruined city, its streets reduced to rubble by years of aerial bombardment, and now a storm of enemy artillery. Civilians huddle in basements, desperately scavenging for food where they can. Soldiers frantically dig in, improvising defensive positions in the wreckage. In the tense hours before the enemy attack begins, you and your fellow fighters are told to expect no mercy, and to give no ground, and to fight to the last man. It's your duty and honor to die for your country, and anyone who panics and tries to run away will be shot as an example to the others. You and your comrades have few weapons, little ammunition, and have had little training. When the attack finally comes, it's overwhelming. Shells rain down, and the enemy infantry, skilled in the tactics of urban combat, slowly make their way forward, street by street, supported by thousands of tanks. The fighting is brutal and at close quarters, and casualties on both sides are appalling. Now imagine you're only 12 years old. It's Berlin, April 1945, and the situation is desperate. The war is already as good as lost. The German army is incapable of holding its front lines against the never-ending pressure of Allied attacks. The Third Reich is crumbling fast. But Hitler orders the armed forces and the civilian population to fight on to the bitter end. In the West, American and British Commonwealth forces have liberated France and pushed through Belgium. The last great German offensive on the Western Front has ended in catastrophe in the frozen fighting of the Battle of the Bulge, losing more than 90,000 men and hundreds of tanks that cannot be replaced. Now the Allies have crossed into Germany itself, reaching the Elbe River. In the east, the unstoppable Soviet juggernaut, after pausing in its relentless advance to secure its flanks and improve its supply, has once again broken through the weakened German defensive lines. Berlin is surrounded under constant artillery bombardment and awaiting the final Soviet assault into the city. Hitler continues to give orders for relief forces to punch through the Soviet stranglehold on the city and relieve the capital, but those are fantasies. German forces outside the city are exhausted and far too weak, and all their efforts to break through have already failed. No help is coming. Germany's military has already lost more than 3 million dead over the course of the war, with another more than 1 million missing and taken prisoner. Her manpower reserves are completely exhausted by nearly 6 long years of total war waged across continents. An entire generation of German men has been devastated, and the German High Command is desperate for every living soul they can throw into the front lines. They've been scraping the bottom of the barrel for some time now. In September 1944, as German forces are pushed back further and further on both fronts, Hitler orders the creation of the Volkssturm, a sort of improvised militia separate from the army. It officially drafts males as young as 16 and as old as 60, but much younger boys sometimes volunteer and are sometimes forced to serve in its ranks. Some of the older men are veterans of the First World War, called on once again to fight and die for their country in a titanic struggle. But most have no military experience at all and are given only the most basic training and sparse and outdated equipment. Some even go into battle carrying weapons from the previous century. These old men and teenagers are hurled unprepared into combat alongside the army and take terrible casualties. By February of 1945, as the military situation continues to deteriorate hopelessly, the Volkssturm starts conscripting women and girls as auxiliary personnel. But none of these measures are nearly enough. The Nazi leadership has long been interested in preparing children for war. Nazi youth groups have been formed as early as 1922, in the social and political upheaval after the disastrous First World War, and in 1926 the Hitler Youth was officially christened. Boys as young as 10 years old were encouraged to participate in the junior branch of the group, the Jungvolk. And as for girls, a parallel organization was created, the League of German Girls. There were more than 25,000 Hitler Youth members by 1930, and membership swelled as Hitler's political fortunes took off. By 1936, membership in the Hitler Youth had been made mandatory for every young boy in Germany, whether his parents wanted him to join or not, as long as he was considered racially acceptable. Parents who declined to register their children for enrollment could face fines or imprisonment. No other youth organizations were even permitted to exist, so for many boys the Hitler Youth was the only way to participate in activities like sports and camping. But political, ideological, and racial training were always the main focus of the group. The entire reason for its existence was to teach children and young teenagers to be obedient Nazis, and members were even encouraged to inform on their parents if they voiced opposition to the Nazi Party. Every member swore a personal oath of loyalty to Adolf Hitler as the savior of Germany. Once the war broke out, Hitler Youth were given increasingly militaristic training. They learned how to use weapons and were taught basic assault tactics. Their training emphasized physical fitness, and they were subjected to army-style drills meant to teach them total and automatic obedience to orders. Above all, they were taught that it was their duty to sacrifice their lives for the fatherland. In 1943, as the war turned increasingly against Germany, an entire SS division was formed from Hitler Youth members, the 12th SS Hitlerjugend. The recruits were supposed to be at least 17 years old, but many boys 16 and under joined its ranks. In 1944, the division was sent to Normandy to hold the town of Caen against British and Canadian attacks. There, in the dense urban terrain, its young soldiers fought fanatically, often recklessly, showing just how far their indoctrination had gone. Often they fought on after all hope of victory was gone, refusing to retreat or surrender. Allied soldiers remembered being forced to kill boys young enough to be their sons. In a month of hard fighting, well over half the division's young men were killed or wounded. After refitting and receiving replacements, it would go on to fight in the Battle of the Bulge, again suffering appalling losses. The unit ended the war, making hopeless counterattacks in Austria. In the final desperate months of the war, the dying Reichs turned to younger and younger children. In the last surviving film footage of Hitler from March 20, 1945, the leader of Germany, looking feeble and exhausted, stands in front of a line of teenage boys. As the Soviet army prepares for its final offensive, the young fighters have been summoned for a medal ceremony and an opportunity to meet the man for whom they've all sworn to sacrifice everything. They've been selected as examples of Germany's brave youth to receive the Iron Cross for their heroism. Their faces beam with pride as Hitler shakes their hands. The most famous among them is Wilhelm Hübner, who at 16 years old was decorated for carrying messages from headquarters to forward positions under heavy fire and filling wheelbarrows full of weapons and supplies for the frontline troops. But the youngest boy present is Alfred Czech, aged only 12 years old. As the fighting in Silesia approached his family's farm, the young boy had seen a group of German soldiers under attack, taking casualties. Using his father's farm wagon and horses, Czech made several trips under enemy fire to collect the wounded and bring them back behind the lines for medical treatment, rescuing 12 men. In the film footage, Hitler pinches the boy's cheeks as he congratulates the young child soldier. Hübner, Czech, and the others receive their medals, share a meal with the Führer at which they recount their exploits, and then return to the fight. A month later, on April 20, 1945, Hitler's birthday, just 10 days before his death by suicide, Germany's increasingly helpless leader makes his last public appearance outside of his heavily fortified underground bunker. As Soviet artillery pummels Berlin and the suburbs of the city are turned into bloody battlegrounds, he again meets with Berlin's child soldiers, handing out medals and encouraging them to make the ultimate sacrifice for their country. Hitler will never again leave his bunker alive. Now, in the final weeks of the war, as Germany's situation crumbles, children are enlisted wholesale. The Volkssturm is routinely drafting children as young as 12. Allied soldiers report encountering armed enemies as young as 8. Thousands of young boys are pulled directly out of grade school, given little to no training, handed weapons, and sent directly into combat against the unstoppable Red Army. In Berlin, entire battalions of young Hitler Youth boys are formed and told to hold the vital bridges that allow reinforcements into the city. Reinforcements that existed only on paper. Others are told to ambush Soviet troops as they advance down Berlin's broad, rubble-filled streets. Some young children are even formed into suicide squads and told to charge Soviet tanks with grenades. Parties of SS soldiers roam the ruined city seeking out deserters. They execute them, shooting them or hanging them from lampposts as an example to others that desertion offers no way out. Even the youngest soldiers are executed for giving in to fear. By now, Berlin is under constant bombardment by Soviet artillery, and the Red Army is in the process of surrounding the city. They punch through the feeble defenses in the suburbs and begin their bloody assault into the urban center. The German defenders, from little boys and girls up to gray-haired elders, fight tenaciously, but there is no hope of success. Slowly, bloodily, the Soviet forces conquer the city block by block until the last Nazi resistance is holed up in government buildings in the center of town. Some of the most zealous defenders make their final stand in the heavily fortified Reichstag, once the seat of the German government before the 1933 fire. Now has been turned into a deadly fortress. Soviet infantry assault the massive building, clearing it out in brutal room-to-room combat over the course of several days, and at last the remnants of the German high command surrender the city. The Germans lose more than 100,000 military personnel defending Berlin, including thousands of children, and nearly 200,000 civilians are killed. The Soviet army loses more than 75,000 dead and 300,000 wounded. Once the fighting finally stops, Soviet troops embark on an orgy of looting and raping throughout the shattered city, terrorizing the survivors. On the 7th of May 1945, when all remaining German forces surrender, the Nazi Third Reich, which was to last 1,000 years, is no more. But for the children who were thrown into the last bloody defense of their homeland, their lives are forever scarred. Thousands of them were killed in battle, and many thousands more spent years in Soviet captivity. 12-year-old Alfred Czech would be shot through the lung while fighting in what would become the Czech Republic, and spent the next 2 years in a prisoner of war camp. He would return home and find that his father had been drafted into the Volkssturm in the final weeks of fighting and killed in combat. Like Czech, those who eventually made it home found their country occupied and divided between East and West. Like so many others, Germany's child soldiers would spend the rest of their lives trying to come to terms with the enormity of what had happened to Germany and their own roles in one of the most brutal, inhuman regimes in history.